All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. And my screen. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Forester, North Carolina Prescribed Fire Series. Welcome back. We were really looking forward to holding an in-person meeting, looking forward to trying to plan a field tour in the spring, all kinds of fun things. And then as COVID numbers started to increase in August, we decided this might be the most safest way to go back to a virtual or a webinar meeting format and be able to share with you so we could continue to share some great information. So welcome to the first meeting of the Prescribed Fire Series. We've got two speakers lined up today. We've got Laurel from NC State Extension and the Southern Fire Exchange. She's going to talk a little bit about fire in the South and the history. And we've got Jennifer Prince with the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission. So two great speakers lined up for you today. Once again, this is the first meeting of a two-part series. So this is just half of the information. So you'll want to come back and stay tuned to us in November to get the second part of the information. All right, well, to make sure that we can continue to communicate during this webinar, we want to make sure folks have an opportunity to ask questions that they may have of the speakers. We will go to Bob Barden with NC State Extension and let him talk with us about the best way to communicate. If I can get my screen to move. There we go. Sorry, Bob.
Nope, that's okay. Thanks, Jennifer. As Jennifer indicated, just a little bit on the logistics for today's webinar. If you are having technology issues or need to answer, for example, if the presenters ask you a question, you can type that information into the chat window. It's just like texting. Most people are familiar with that. If you don't see your chat window, just click on the little chat icon and your chat window will open up. If you got questions for today's presenters, we will ask that you type those into the Q&A feature of Zoom. There again, just click on the little Q&A icon. A window will open up and that will allow you to ask your question. We will be going over those questions as we move through today's webinar. And then at the end of today's webinar, we will be holding on to answer additional questions if needed. There is closed captioning for today's webinar, and you can turn on your closed captioning by clicking on the icon for closed captioning. It's got two little C's in the icon. Just click on that, and that will allow you to see the closed captioning. If you need to get our attention for some reason, if you'll raise your hand, I'll be able to call on you if need be. So please enjoy today's webinar, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jennifer.
All right, great. Thanks, Bob. Rest the screen. As Bob said, we have a great agenda lined up for you today. At the end of each of our presentations, we will give an opportunity to ask questions so that the speakers can directly answer your questions. So as the speakers are talking and you have a question, please type it in that Q&A box as Bob has recommended, and we will try to get those questions answered. A lot of times we get more questions than we really have time to answer during this meeting. And of course, this meeting is set to go to 2:30. But between 2:30 and 3 o'clock, we will have an opportunity to continue to answer your questions. So at the end, at 2:30, after both speakers have an opportunity to speak, if we still have a lot of questions, we will just pause for just a few minutes, and then we will then start talking about more of your questions, or if you have a specific question on your property that you would like to talk with one of our speakers or one of our board members about, we will be staying on the computer and try to get your questions answered. So once again, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for taking a few minutes out of your time, and hopefully this will be some great information for you. And if you're not sure about prescribed fire, hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about the history of it today, and hopefully come back and join us in November as well. All right. With that said, we will get our first speaker on, Laurel with NC State Extension and the Southern Fire Exchange. Laurel, the computer is yours.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Right, so again, thanks for having me today. Again, my name is Laurel. I work out of NC State Extension Forestry on quite a few different fire-related projects that we have there, including coordinating outreach for a group called the Southern Fire Exchange. So in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to give you a little bit of background information that will be helpful to have. And then we'll talk about what fire on the landscape looked like pre-colonization, pre the arrival of Europeans. We'll talk about that arrival, colonization, the impact and how things changed. And then we will get into kind of the conservation movement of the early 1900s, the immersion of this idea of fire suppression and Smoky there, and then talk about how, at least in some of the South, that kind of went away and led to the rise of prescribed fire and sort of this reawakening of the idea that we need fire on the landscape. And I won't talk about the more reading and resources, but this will be up on YouTube when we're done this webinar, and those will be available there for you if you want to learn more about this stuff. So just a quick terms definition so that we are all on the same page. When I talk about wildland fire, I am talking about any non-structure fire, so any fire out on the landscape somewhere that isn't, in a building. And when I talk about wildfire, I'm talking about that sort of fire in a natural area that results from an unplanned ignition. So whether that's lightning, could even be a volcano, could be some sort of human activity, whether intentional arson or an accident like a spark from a car. That's what we mean by wildfire. And then when I talk about prescribed fire, that is, again, a type of wildland fire that results from a planned ignition. And we do prescribe fires. There's a lot of folks who do prescribe fire, and we do it in accordance with the laws and policies and regulations that tell us how to do it safely and effectively. And I just want to establish too that we are talking about the South today, but our entire country, what we call the US now, is by and large a fire adapted country. Most of our ecosystems have some form of a natural fire regime, and that is true across a lot of the country. And we are also a country that is founded on the land originally managed and used by Native people. This is a really cool map. It's native-land.ca, where you can go in and look where you live and look up the sort of ancestral lands on which you live and maybe learn a little bit more about the folks who call that place home as well. And so when we talk about what the South and what North Carolina looked like before Europeans arrived, it's also really important to remember that a lot of us were taught this idea that North America before Europeans was sort of like Yellowstone National Park on a grand scale, right? This sort of pristine, untouched wilderness area. And there were a couple kind of hunter-gatherer groups moving through. But that's really not true. The population estimates of North America are really challenging to make, and there's a lot of debate amongst scholars about how many people were living here. But what we do know is that there were quite a few of them in the millions. There were diverse tribes with different cultures and religious beliefs and craftsmanship. They had cities, they had different languages, different relationships to each other. That picture there in the bottom center is Judaculla Rock, which is out in Western North Carolina, is a series of pretty complex petroglyphs that date back anywhere from maybe, I think, the 1200 to like 6000 BC, depending on which paper you're looking at and the different method they're using. But this place was very much occupied, and the folks who lived here very much used fire as a management tool. And again, there was a lot of variety here, because when we talk about even just North Carolina, we're talking about a bunch of different Native people who had different traditions, different relationships to the land, lived in different ecosystems. But in general, they used fire for a variety of purposes, and a lot of those purposes are pretty similar to what we do today. They used it for hunting, to create areas that were more conducive to the species that they needed to use. They also used it for hunting as a tool to actually do the hunting, to corral species into areas where they were easier to slaughter. They also used fire to clear land for agriculture, to reduce the risk of wildfires, as a tool of warfare and to communicate with each other. and to make areas easier to travel through. Again, these are a lot of reasons that we use fire today as a tool. And lightning also ignited quite a few fires. This would, again, have varied depending on where you are. And you can see this shows the number of lightning flashes per square kilometer per year. Excuse me. But all you need to know looking at this map is that those darker areas are areas where there would have been more lightning density. So the sort of proportion of fire on the landscape that was caused by humans versus lightning would have varied by location. There's some debate about that. But we know that both of them were influential parts of what formed the landscape. But of course, we know eventually Europeans did arrive and things changed quite a bit pretty quickly. The forests and other areas that Europeans found when they came here would have looked very different from what we're used to seeing now. That top left picture is a longleaf pine stand down in the coastal plain. The upper right photo is a mixed hardwood pine stand in the Piedmont. And the one in the bottom is a picture that I'm sure quite a few of you have seen that is some very large old growth American chestnuts out in the mountains. And there would have also been a lot of types of forest cover or natural areas that, again, would have looked really different than today. This is a map of a European from 1718, and you'll notice there's a little red circle around something that says Grand Savanne. There was a very large savanna in that part of North Carolina. So we know that there would have been a lot of different ecosystems that those ecosystems are still here today, but they would have covered the landscape in a much different way. And they were used and maintained with fire, particularly things like those longleaf savannas, actual just grassland savannas that rely on very frequent fire. But as Europeans arrived in larger numbers, again, things changed pretty quickly. You can see that upper image shows you the areas of uncut forest from 1620 to 1850. And you can see even in that just under 200 years, the amount of forest that was cleared, and that was before a lot of the Industrial Revolution that enabled that clearing to be done more efficiently. Native populations were drastically reduced. Things like smallpox and other diseases really took a toll. They were also, I think as a lot of us know, forcibly removed and in some cases, murdered because Europeans wanted the land on which they were living. Europeans, as they moved into those lands that were previously occupied by Native Americans, also brought with them a lot of changes. Hogs were introduced to the landscape. That's still something we're dealing with today, and they can cause a lot of changes. Many areas were cleared for a different kind of agriculture, and agriculture on a larger scale than had been practiced by the native folks. And this led to sort of mostly in the 1800s, but the early 1900s as well, of this sort of nationwide, really exploitation of the resources that we have. Wood was really needed for a lot of things. People used it to heat their homes, to cook with. That was a huge use that required a lot of wood every year. We were building cities, we were building things. In a lot of cases, we were at war and needed wood for a lot of purposes to fuel that. And as the Industrial Revolution came on, things like railroads and other advances allowed timber to be cleared much easier. And it's also important to remember that the things these folks were doing wasn't what we call forestry now. Sometimes in forestry, you'll hear the term clear cutting, but that's really not what this was. Clear cutting is a forestry technique that is used as part of a forest management plan and a thoughtful process of we're going to cut these trees and then get other trees to grow up in their stead. That's not what was happening here. Forestry wasn't a profession that existed in the United States at that time, really. These folks were just cutting down trees, shipping them off to be used for whatever they were going to be used for, and moving on to the next. And that's also what happened in the South. And again, forest management, forestry, not really a concept for the Europeans who were in power at this time. Forests in the South were heavily exploited, particularly for the Naval Stores industry. So these were products that were created from the sap of mostly longleaf pine trees that were essential to shipbuilding, which is why they're called Naval Stores. And these longleaf pine forests that covered a lot of North Carolina, a lot of the South, Their sap was harvested. As you can see a photo here, they would have chipped the bark off and kind of cut up into the exterior of the tree in such a way that they could get the sap out. And once those trees were depleted, they cut them down and moved on to the next. And longleaf is often referred to as the pine that built the South for that very reason. The forests that were cleared went into building a lot of the cities and infrastructure that in a lot of cases we still do use today. And there's a lot of evidence of this still on the landscape. That photo on the right is what we call a cat-faced tree. That's a tree that would have been used for the naval stores industry. That's how they got the sap out. You can see those markings where they would have cut on the tree to make the sap flow out. And you can still find a lot of those around North Carolina today. But interestingly, in a lot of North Carolina, at least in the Piedmont and the coastal plain particularly, a lot of folks kept using fire as a management tool. And this would have happened for a lot of different reasons. A lot of the folks who lived in North Carolina after Native people were displaced came from places like Scotland and Ireland, places where they already used fire as a tool in things like managing their rangelands. So when they came here and saw that Native folks were using fire, that's something that would have made a lot of cultural sense to them. Those of you who particularly live in those places like the Piedmont coastal plain will also probably know that we have a really quick growing season or a really long growing season here. Things grow very quickly. It would have become very apparent to the first Europeans who came over that when you stop burning, things change very, very quickly. And I know the photos on the screen are pretty small, but they do sort of show you just how quickly a longleaf pine forest that's beautifully maintained with fire becomes kind of an overgrown mess when you stop using fire. And that overgrown mess would not have been something that those European folks were very interested in, right? Those forests that have a lot of more of that kind of mid-story scrubby stuff are a lot harder to move through. They're a greater threat of wildfire. They're a lot harder for your hogs or your other livestock to be out running through. And so the European folks who moved into those parts of North Carolina, in many cases kept using fire as a tool as part of their culture. But sort of in parallel to that, there's this rising, particularly in the end of the 1800s, early 1900s especially, there's this very intense rise in the idea that we need to put out every fire. Fire is dangerous. And we look back on that now and we can see that that was pretty clearly a bad call. But at the time, it would have made a lot of sense to folks. It's understandable to see how they would have come to that conclusion. And it came from a lot of places, right? This was the time when people were realizing that natural resources were not an infinite resource. That sounds sort of silly to say, but people coming from Europe to the United States, or what is now the United States, saw this huge, vast area with these huge, vast forests. And a lot of them truly sort of believed that there was just no way we could use all of that up. And in the early 1900s, we're starting to realize that that was not true. What we call the progressive era and the conservation ethic that came with it was really coming to the forefront. And progressive has a very different meaning than it does today. This would have included people like John Muir, Aldo Leopold, Teddy Roosevelt, people who were sort of advocating for this idea that we need to take better care of the places that we have. We need to set aside some places that aren't for harvesting or for economic gain, right? The national parks were founded, the national forest system became a thing. There was also a rise in forestry as a profession in the United States. The first foresters that came to the United States were trained in Germany and came over back to the US in the early 1900s. And they were trained in Germany where they don't really use fire as a management tool. So they would have been coming over trying to sort of implement this fledgling profession in consort with this idea that natural resources aren't inexhaustible. We have to take care of them. And they're coming from a professional training that just doesn't see fire as part of that. There were also a lot of very large, very deadly wildfires in the late 1800s, early 1900s that killed quite a few people, that were very, very scary, and that rightfully sort of made people realize that they needed to do something different. Unfortunately, what they decided to do differently was put out all of the fires always, no matter what. And as part of that, they wanted to come to the South and make all of those European folks and their descendants who had kept burning and kept up this culture of fire, they needed to come in and make sure that they weren't doing it. They wanted to put a stop to that. And again, there were some valid reasons for that. Forests that had been just cut over and left were starting to regrow, and in some cases there was concern that fires could inhibit that. We know that for longleaf pine, that's not the case, but in other parts of the US, particularly out west, that may have been more understandable. And again, those very large, deadly wildfires really scared a lot of people. But there were also some not so understandable reasons why this was happening. Cultural biases were big factors. The folks who were coming into the South to try and make people stop burning really saw them as stupid and as less than because they were using fire as part of their culture and as a management tool. There are some really interesting, but for many people, I think, upsetting studies that were published in the early 1900s when sort of psychology and sociology were, as we know them today, were sort of just coming into the foreground. Talking to Southern folks who were still using fire, and the things that they have to say about them are, again, just really upsetting. They saw the fact that they were using fire as a sign that they were less good people. The picture you can see on the screen is a group called the Dixie Crusaders, which were established in the 1920s. And they came through the South with their moving picture, which was a big deal at the time, showed folks this Burn and Bill movie, which was kind of, you can probably guess from the picture, about this crazy guy named Burnin' Bill who just won't stop burning his woods down. And again, it was propaganda. It was to get people to see people who were using fire and fire itself as bad and to stop doing it. And often all of this sort of gets collected into the idea of like the Smoky Bear era. But Smoky Bear didn't really come around until the 1940s. He was initially conceived of as World War II era propaganda because there was a lot of fear that forests were needed for the war effort, and there was a fear that wildfires could cause a danger to that, or that the Axis powers would cause fires as a way of sort of sabotaging the US, both sort of in terms of instilling fear and also destroying a wood supply that we needed. But as we all know, Smoky Bear was incredibly effective. It's still a public relations campaign that's around today. Even though he has changed his message, he's still incredibly popular. And so this all sort of continued until the mid-1900s, this idea that fire is bad. The people who insist on using it in the South and in North Carolina are silly and stupid, and we'll take care of them eventually and get them to stop that. And so all of that sort of continues until the middle of the 1900s, when this guy comes around. His name's Herbert Stoddard. He worked for an organization that eventually became the US Fish and Wildlife Service. And he was asked to look at where all the quail were going. So after the Civil War, a lot of wealthy Northerners bought up property that was really cheap at the time, old plantations, and they used them largely for quail hunting. And so quail needs fire for its habitat. In the absence of fire, quail populations will decrease, which was exactly what was happening at the time. And so Herbert Stoddard was asked to do some studies to figure out where all of the quail were going. And his results came back pretty conclusively that the lack of fire was a problem, was the problem. And that was really contrary to what people believed at the time, again, about fire and about the fact that it was actually important. And there was a lot of pushback, both from agencies and from sort of regular people on his results, but he did more studies and found the same thing. And eventually it was kind of grudgingly accepted that, hey, actually, maybe our ecosystems really do need fire in order to remain healthy and in order to provide things that we as humans want from them. And so this sort of kick-started this slow, gradual resurgence of prescribed fire as something that was accepted and eventually even encouraged on the landscape in North Carolina and the rest of the South. By the sort of late 1950s, 1960s, there were fledgling prescribed fire programs in some parts of the coastal plain in lower Piedmont in the South. And in the mountains, it took a little bit longer. Mountains have different ecosystems. They're still fire adapted, but prescribed burning took a little bit more time to sort of take off there. But now, both in the mountains, in the Piedmont, and the coastal plain, all across our state and all across the South, there's a really growing understanding that prescribed burning is an absolutely essential tool. We need it to achieve a lot of different land management objectives, and we need it to keep our ecosystems healthy and to do a lot of the things we need them to do. And so I won't talk too much about sort of how we use prescribed fire today because Jennifer Prince is going to cover that in her talk next. But I'll just briefly mention that in terms of where we are today, the Southeast implements more acres of prescribed fire than any other region. North Carolina does quite a lot of prescribed fire, and we're trying to grow it every year. Professionals and landowners do prescribed fire. A lot of times, folks who work in fire management are sort of thought of as, you can see this woman in her, we call nomex, those bright yellow shirts. But just regular landowners do a lot of prescribed fire in our state and in the South. We do still have wildfires, and just again, Jennifer's going to talk more about that, but we do still have wildfires. We actually have more wildfires in the eastern United States than the West, but they are much smaller. We typically have them in the fall and spring. Almost all of them are human caused. But prescribed fire is the absolute best tool to reduce the risk of those large catastrophic wildfires. And it's one of the big reasons why we try and use as much of it as we can. And then I'll just end with sort of talking about where we think things are headed. Climate change is a big problem. It's a big problem for basically every conservation issue. And I think any of us who have watched the news will know that fire is no exception. The things that we know in terms of how climate change is impacting prescribed fire is that it is becoming more difficult. Prescribed fires, to do them safely, we need specific kinds of weather. We don't want to be doing a prescribed fire and having the smoke carry across a busy road or onto an elementary school, for example. And those conditions where it's safe to do prescribed fire are becoming more difficult to find. Wildfires are becoming more frequent. They're likely going to burn more area. And that's in part because prescribed fire is becoming more difficult, but due to other factors too. We know that impacts, as they often do, disproportionately impact vulnerable populations unless we intervene and do something about that. And we also know that there's a lot of complicating factors. Hurricanes, for example, when a hurricane comes through like Hurricane Michael did in Florida and Georgia a couple years back, particularly hurricanes that are really wind heavy, they can knock down a lot of mature trees and make it really hard to get prescribed fire back in those stands because there's so many large trees in them. The funding and resources we have to devote to this stuff is always a factor. How we build out our human civilization is always a factor. How we build our houses and our communities and how resilient they are to wildfire and to prescribed fire, frankly, and how much we factor that into our building is a factor. And as well as the Western wildfires and some of the sort of more workforce type stuff, how we actually manage fire is going to have a big impact as well. But as of today, we use a lot of prescribed fire. We know that it is an absolutely essential tool, and we have a long history in North Carolina and in the South showing us that people have used it for really thousands of years and have always been part of the fire management in this region and are always going to be. And so with that, I'll go ahead and take any questions. Like I said, there's a slide here at the end. This will be up on the YouTube page that has some really good resources that are available if you want to learn more. If you're particularly someone who's interested in the sort of cultural piece, I really recommend that second to last link. It's a webinar, it's kind of long, but it's given by a gentleman named Johnny Stowe who works in South Carolina for their wildlife agency. And he is, a lifelong Southerner, very passionate about fire, and he really speaks to the sort of deep cultural bond that a lot of folks have with fire in this region and the importance of that. So I really recommend that if you're interested. And with that, I will end. And it looks like we had a question from Louise Belk, or a comment, a really good one actually, that they recently read an excellent book, Looking for Longleaf, The Fall and Rise of an American Forest by Lawrence Early. Gives an excellent history of fire turpentining, which is tapping those longleaf pines for the Naval Stores industry. Wildlife, it was written in 2004, but still stands up as a great historical reference. And that is absolutely true. That's a really good book. If you're looking for a book length item, definitely recommend. David Godwin says 1491 by Charles Mann. That's another really great one that sort of covers predominantly what that sort of myth of the pristine that I was talking about, and really covers how people in North and South America pre-European arrival, the extent to which they impacted the land, the extent to which they built complex civilizations and managed the land. That is also a very good read.
So that was great. Thank you, Laurel. Great presentation. Great information on the history of prescribed fire and wildfire in the South. We've definitely been able to see what our landscapes can look like with the presence and the absence of both wildfire and prescribed fire. So thank you for that. If somebody else did have a question for Laurel and you wanted to type it in the Q&A box real quick, we still have a few minutes. So feel free to do that. If not, but if you have some more questions as our next speaker continues to speak, continue to please put those questions in the Q&A and we can get those answered at the end of this meeting. All right, well, if there are no other questions for Laurel, thank you again. And we will move forward with our second speaker of the afternoon, and that is Jennifer Prince with the North Carolina Wildlife Commission. So, Jennifer, the floor is yours.
All righty, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, good. So, hey, I'm Jennifer Prince, and I am the Northern Coast Forest Manager for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit at the same time.
Hey, Jennifer, I think you are going in and out a little bit. I'm not sure if you've got your microphone on or.
So today, a little presentation overview. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between wildfire and prescribed fire. We're going to discuss why fire is viewed as bad. Talk a little bit about the benefits of fire and how fire is used as a management tool. And we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission prescribed burning program. This is kind of a broad statement. We'll see fire pertaining to the context of wildfire as something negative and prescribed fire as something more positive. And then I've some people who think any form of fire is. When you take a step back and put yourself in someone else's shoes that does not have any natural history background or had any fire exposure, you can kind of somewhat understand where their thought process is, especially since this past summer, every time we turned our TVs on, we were bombarded with pictures of towns burned to the ground in Washington, Oregon, California. But hopefully today, after listening to Laurel and myself, you'll kind of leave with a more of appreciation of fire's role in our ecosystems and our society. So Laurel covered on this, but just a quick refresher, what is wildfire? So wildfire is an unplanned fire that burns in a natural area such as a forest, grassland, or prairie. And it's typically caused by human activity or some type of natural phenomena such as lightning. And if we take a look at what wildfire looked like this past year in the United States, I was able to pull some of these stats from the NT website, which is available to the public, and this gives a lot of details about individual fires, briefing people on what's going on, expected evacuations, and updates about containment and resources being used in the area. And this year, there were about 46,000 fires reported that burned close to 6 million acres. And most of these fires were at the western part of the country. If we take a look at a 10-year period, we see an average of about 7 million acres are burned every year, which is more than double the average of 3 million that we were seeing in the 1990s. So what causes these catastrophic fires? Well, this year, the West experienced a lot of hot, dry weather patterns that were made conditions favorable for human-caused incidents as well as lightning strikes. As Laurel discussed, some of the fire suppression policies, people have been putting out fires, so to speak, for more than a century, resulting in a lot of overgrown forests, grassland, and shrub habitat. And this buildup has resulted in significant fuel loads waiting for prime time to sort of take off. And then another thing is urbanization. We are seeing more people moving to rural and wilderness areas that are considered high-risk fire corridor areas. So that's been a big issue. And then there's also global warming. We're starting to see periods of significant rainfall, longer growing seasons, warmer temps, and this all results in more available fuels throughout forests and grasslands to help feed these big fires. And some of the negative effects that we're seeing with these large incidents are damaged trees through completely wiped out stands. This is a result of individual tree torching or crown fires moving across the landscape. Another negative effect is reduced soil stability. A lot of these fires are very hot. They're burning through duff layers, increasing the potential for soil erosion and potential landslides during the next major rain event. We're also seeing damage to life and property. And a lot of these incidents produce heavy smoke with levels that can be really dangerous to public. And this past summer here in North Carolina, we experienced some of those air quality issues, some of the western fires. But if we can look at destruction and kind of take our feelings about wildfire and remove property destruction from the equation, we see that a lot of these wildfires are not always bad, but they serve as a natural process that is a catalyst for important ecosystem changes. We see that it helps remove heavy brush and kind of resets early successional habitat that is crucial for providing resources such as nutrients and cover for both game and non-game species. There's thinning by fire. Timber management practices out west is very different than what we experience here in North Carolina. And this thinning by fire provides openings and gaps that is beneficial to life cycles of many plants and animals. And one example I'm going to give you, my husband dispatched out to a fire this past summer in Idaho. And when he checked in with me, he told me that the fire was just backing nicely across the landscape, and it was really cleaning up a lot of the dead vegetation, and which would promote regrowth that would benefit a lot of game bird species in that region. So that's just an example of how not all wildfires are bad. Then if we fly back over to the East Coast and take a look at North Carolina, Laurel touched on this. We know has suffered from fire suppression, especially throughout the 40s and 50s, and you can kind of see this on this graph here that I pulled from the service website that kind of shows the acreage burned with the year. And if we look at the 40s and 50s, we saw an increase in wildfire activity due to these suppression efforts and fuel loading. And then we also started this kind of a change in tree structure, and we were kind of losing a lot of our fire adapted trees because before suppression, many of our upland sites and burn transitions in North Carolina would have favored longleaf pine with open understories, and a lot of our loblolly and hardwood would have been pushed back to lower elevations and during bulls. Without this fire able to establish itself upslope and start outcompeting native longleaf stands, especially as timber was being cut and reestablishment was delayed, and we started to see this major shift in species composition across the landscape. So to kind of review, we know that fire is a natural disturbance, and eradicating it is impossible, and it does more harm than good. And no matter how hard we try to control, we can't control the weather, and there's going to be periods of hot and dry weather patterns. And we know that a lot of these hot and dry patterns are typically associated with La Nina conditions, and they can cause extreme and difficult to control fires. And some of the examples of this here in North Carolina in recent years were the Paynes Bay Fire, the Evans Road Fire, and Juniper Road Fire, which occurred 2008 and 2011 here in the coastal plain of North Carolina. And these fires took a lot of time and resources to suppress. And then more recently, the 2016 North Carolina mountain fires, an example of one of those was the Party Rock Fire. So since we can't control the weather, we know that we can help control fuel loads, and that our best line of defense is using prescribed fire. So what is prescribed fire? Well, it's technically defined as the process of applying fire to a predetermined area under specific environmental conditions to achieve a desired outcome. And there's many benefits associated with prescribed fire. And the first two that we're going to talk about are hazardous fuel reduction and the benefits to fire-dependent ecosystems. So heavy roughs can accumulate quickly and exceed dangerous pre-burn levels within 3 to 4 years, and more fuel equals hotter fire. So prescribed burning is the most practical way to reduce combustible fuels in our forests and grasslands. And if we can get it burning on a 3 to 4 year rotation after the initial burn, this kind of helps break up the contiguous stands and reduce fuel loads. And a direct result of prescribed burning is in the event that we do have a wildfire, we have low intensity burn conditions that are much easier to contain as opposed to high intensity burns that could destroy life and property. So the next benefit is the role that fire plays on fire-dependent ecosystems. As we mentioned before, we would have had more longleaf pine on upland sites and burnt transitions. But since fire doesn't freely move across the landscape, we now use prescribed fire to mimic natural disturbances, which is important for many different species' life cycles. And for example, longleaf savannas exist because of fire. Frequent low-intensity burns are crucial for maintaining that open forest and rich grassland. And without fire, the understory would eventually become shaded, and we would lose a lot of those herbaceous plants. And many of these plants have adapted and learned to thrive with fire. And some of those are longleaf pine, for example. They germinate and grow best in openings and gaps. Pine that is found in lower elevations and poorly drained soils, they rely on fire to open cones and release seed. Wiregrass is really cool. It grows in tussocks, and its growing points are protected in their tufts, and when the fire burns across, they're able to use their stored water to kind of cool the air around the bud. And then many other herbaceous plants store their organs and roots and rhizomes underground. So once the fire burns across and cleans up the dead vegetation, you can have new regrowth within 10 days. So prescribed fire is also very important for reducing competition of low-value, poor-quality, shade-tolerant hardwoods that shade out a lot of longleaf pine seedlings and the various herbaceous species. And discussed before, many species require these fires to release seeds and provide bare ground for germination, while also recycling nutrients back into the soil, making that available for the next crop. And if you look up on the slide, the first picture on the bottom left is of mayapple, which is an important food for box turtles. This site where this picture was taken had a blanket of pine straw prior to burning, and this colony of mayapple emerged the following week after burning. The other three pictures are, the middle one is pink lady slipper, the bottom right is dwarf crested iris, and then the top is butterfly weed, which appeared the spring and early summer following a dormant season burn. And all of these species are very crucial for a lot of pollinator species. And I felt like this stand of sundial lupine on the sandbanks tract of the Chelan Swamp Game Land deserved its own slide, because it really is a beautiful sight to see growing along many of our roads and longleaf pine restoration areas in the spring and early summer. These plants really benefit from routine burning, and they have continued to expand after each burn rotation. And then the picture on the bottom right is a frosted elfin, which is a butterfly who uses lupine as a host plant. So other benefits of prescribed as a management tool for both forest and wildlife management. So we're going to go in to discuss those tactics as well as compare it to some other treatment options. So using fire, we use fire to achieve a variety of forest management objectives, and one of the main ones is site prep, especially for southern pine species. Fire helps logging operations and controlling vegetation until seedlings are able to become established. The next objective with fire is to control hardwood and understory. A lot of time and money goes into site prep and planting operations. So fire is used to control fast-growing species like sweet gum and red maple that could outcompete and slow timber growth and reduce habitat. And again, fire plays a crucial role in managing a lot of fire-resistant species like the ones that we discussed in the previous slide. And here are all pictures taken on some of our game lands here in the northern coast and how we've been using fire. Another major benefit of using prescribed fire is the benefits of controlling insects and disease. Prescribed fire used correctly can promote healthy forests who are less stressed and less likely to have a pine beetle outbreak. Another benefit is it helps control brown spot disease that weakens and can eventually kill longleaf pine seedlings. This not only hurts individuals' pocketbooks because of reestablishment costs, but it also slows timber production. And then a benefit of prescribed fire that I think everybody can get on board with is the reduction of tick populations that are associated with a lot of tick-borne illnesses. So prescribed fire is not only used to achieve forest goals, but also improves habitat conditions for many wildlife species. Fire sets back succession by consuming litter layer and dead plant material, improving nutrient availability. Also helps stimulate seed germination. It provides open conditions for travel and feeding game bird broods such as turkey and quail and a lot of ground feeding songbirds. And it also helps promote a vertical structure, which is needed for a lot of birds and cover species. And one good thing about this is that we can measure success through wildlife and plant surveys to help track changes over a period of time. And a good example of this is the breeding bird survey. This allows us to detect various tropical migrants and resident birds using our managed landscape. So now we're going to talk about and kind of compare prescribed fire costs to other treatment options. Prescribed fire typically costs about $30 to $35 an acre. And some additional treatment options is herbicide, and that can be done through aerial application using a helicopter, and that typically runs about $100 an acre. Then you have ground application, which is typically done with the skidder and spray unit. That can depend, like the average is about $95, but it can kind of run between $90 and $100 per acre. And then you can get backpack crews to come in, and that's a little bit more pricey, and the average is between $100 and $150 an acre. Some mechanical treatment options is mulching. I have found that most people charge a minimum of $1,000 a day. So depending on your equipment operator, that could get very expensive very quickly. And then you have a of drum chopping, which typically costs about $170 an acre. And although fire is normally very effective and the most bang for your buck, sometimes to achieve various objectives, you have to pair fire with one of these other treatment options to get things looking kind of how you planned. A lot of times for site prep, we'll spray and then burn, and that really maximizes the establishment. So to kind of wrap up and answer the question of can fire be good and bad at the same time? Well, the way I look at it is fire is not inherently good or bad, but if wildlife habitat, forestry goals, aesthetics, and safety are all met with the use of fire, whether it's wild or controlled, we can consider it to be good fire. So now I'm going to tell you all a little bit about the Wildlife Commission's burn program. We are using fire to manage about 2 million acres from the mountains to the coast. And we are doing this through conducting dormant season burns, which occur in the winter, growing season burns in the spring and early summer, and with site prep burns conducted typically in the early fall. And we're using fire to restore native habitats, maintain healthy forests, which provide optimal habitat for game and non-game species, as well as many rare and endangered species. We're also using fire to maintain marsh habitats, which is very important for many shorebird species. And we're using fire to improve dove fields and waterfowl impoundment to help control invasive species, to promote food for many migratory birds, and enhance recreational opportunities for the public as well. And all of these pictures here are dove field and waterfowl impoundment burns, and the top one is a marsh burn at Roanoke Island Marshes in Dare County. And the Wildlife Commission has steadily been building capacity over the years. This is a graph showing acres burned against the years, and it runs from 1986 to 2019. And we've seen a steady increase because we've been able to acquire more land. We've also added a lot of personnel to the Land and Water Access Division, which is really aid in achieving more habitat work across North Carolina. And here's a look at 2021 accomplishments for us. We've averaged about a little over 27,000 acres. We got a little bit of a slow start this past winter due to wet conditions, and we were trying to be careful with COVID, smoke in the air, and COVID is a respiratory illness. We were trying to be mindful of that and make good decisions to benefit the public and wildlife habitat. So how does the Wildlife Commission use fire effectively and safety? So without making a plan, blocks are typically identified a year in advance. They are then reviewed and approved by the management biologist and the ecoregion supervisor. Once approved, I start constructing a burn plan and making maps And then these documents are sent back to the ecoregion supervisor and our game lands manager for final review. And then once January rolls around, I typically have all my blocks listed out with acceptable wind parameters, and I start watching and paying attention to the different weather forecasts. I know when all of them are updated each day, so I constantly am reviewing those, trying to make a decision on the next day's burn. One cool thing that we have as a resource is smoke modeling software, and this allows us to input fuel loads and current weather conditions in and kind of get an output of smoke dispersion downwind. And we use all of this to make sure that our weather parameters align with smoke management guidelines. And this is a document that can be found on the Forest Service website. And this management plan kind of helps us mitigate the effects of smoke from forestry-related prescribed burning on smoke-sensitive areas. So once everything is approved and everything aligns to conduct the burn safely, we will start submitting a burn permit on the Forest Service site, weather for our burn submitting that and supporting documents to the Forest District Office, and then asking county rangers, emergency management to make them aware of the upcoming burn. And then we also submit burn notices to the Raleigh office, and you guys can find these burns on our Twitter. You can also call the Raleigh office to get information about burns as well. So while I'm taking care of all that paperwork, typically the crews are going out and starting to establish fire lines. We use a dozer and a plow. We also use hand tools, and the top picture here is using a leaf blower to just kind of clean all the litter off to good mineral soil. And then once everything is completed, we meet up and brief and talk about fire techniques that we're going to use for the day and conduct a test fire to make sure everything looks good. And then once we start executing the burn, we're constantly monitoring fire lines, the weather, and we're communicating back and forth. Then once everything is burned out, we mop up, make sure that there's nothing flaming or any potential for embers to go across the line, and then the burn check multiple times the following week. And here's a few pictures of some of the equipment that we have. We have a dozer and plow on site for each burn. We've got the smoke modeling software that we previously talked about. The top right picture is our power shot hand launcher. So this shoots out what they call dragon eggs, which really are little ping pong balls. And these balls are filled with potassium permanganate, and the gun will inject antifreeze into these balls before they're launched out of the gun. And then when they hit the ground, it combusts and starts a little spot fire. And this is really handy for really thick areas that you don't want to walk through. We've also just purchased a drone, which also is able to eject these dragon egg balls, and we're using that in stands. And that's been extremely helpful for thick areas. And then we also utilize the helicopter with Forest Service that will allow us to fly over a stand and drop ping pong balls as well. We fortunately have been able to develop a lot of partnerships with a lot of agencies listed here above. We've been able to do a lot of burns with both the Forest Service, Park Service, Department of Defense, the Wild Turkey Federation, and Quail Forever have helped fund some projects for fuel reduction projects, as well as some equipment for us. which has been extremely helpful. And now I just kind of want to wrap up with a little spotlight of the Voice of America game land that is located in my work area in Beaufort County. And this property was formerly a federal government broadcasting facility. And it consists of about 28. And Henslow sparrow is considered one of the most game species in North Carolina due to the loss of grassland habitat. And they started population on 11. And we introduced fire in 2016. And as monitoring efforts have been going on, we have seen an increase in Henslow sparrow activity there. And NC State University is currently working on a project investigating the effects of fire on the nesting behavior, which will help direct us on timing and intensity of burns and other management actions going on there on the game lands. Not only are the birds benefiting, but several native and rare plants are benefiting from burning at VOA. And here's a picture or several pictures of that. We've got toothache grass, got yellow pitcher plant. This picture was taken a few weeks after a July burn there this past year. We've got orange-fringed orchid. The bottom left here is a landscape picture of green up after this burn was the end of August this past year. We've got soapwort and ginseng growing there. And then the bottom right is also another landscape picture showing green up of our July burn that was conducted there this past summer. So the Wildlife Commission has a lot of great examples of restoration burns and maintenance on both longleaf and loblolly stands. We also offer a lot of good examples of various stages of timber management across the state. So really encourage you guys to check that out. Be mindful, we are going into hunting season. So if you're out on the game lands, remember to wear your orange. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to any of us. You can find our information on the Wildlife Resources Commission's webpage. And to wrap up, my slide went out, but does anybody have any questions?
Yes, Jennifer, there are several.
Okay,
So
I cannot see them. I lost connection on my computer.
No problem. I will read them to you.
Okay.
All right, so it looks like Miss Rose says my land was clear cut 2 years ago, and it appears to be a hardwood forest. Before she bought it, trying to restore the forest, and one of the rangers said it would restore itself. So she's concerned about there's a lot of down wood that was left, and it's a real jungle. Would you suggest the use of fire in an area such as this?
So it depends on what her objectives are. Is she trying to manage for a hardwood stand, or is she leaning more toward a pine plantation? Because there's different management techniques that would work for that. If she's going for pine, she could do a release spray. If she's going for hardwoods, it's going to be hard to spray because you're going to kill those hardwoods. And then if you burn it, you're also going to kill those hardwoods.
Okay, great. All right, thank you for that. And just another thought there too, she mentioned a lot of down wood. And before you run a fire through an area, one of the concerns you're looking for is how much large woody debris might be left, because it may be a fire that might be too dangerous for you to control. Okay, second question, Ms. Sowers asked. The land that she's currently stewarding was planted in a loblolly plantation. It has just been thinned. It was hardwood before. with hardwood before it was planted. It will be burned in the late winter. Will this result in more hardwoods? Should she continue to prescribe fire or run fire through this area? And about how often would you suggest that? And she's looking for birds.
So I would recommend doing a dormant season burn initially during the winter. But if you continue to do dormant season burns, you kind of promote woody plants. So after that initial burn, you could switch to a growing season burn anywhere from 2 to 3 years after that. And that'll promote a lot of those herbaceous plants that are beneficial to a lot of bird species.
Great. Okay, thank you. All right, we have another one here. Can fire be used in a loblolly mixed hardwood stand?
So we use that fire in mixed hardwood loblolly stands often. I think you want to pay attention to your weather parameters. If you have more drier conditions, the hardwoods are more prone to be affected, and you could eventually keep hitting burn scars or eventually kill hardwood.
Okay. All right, we've got one more. So let's see. Can the Forest Service do work to create fire lines in advance, or would the landowner be responsible for the fire lines?
So I can't speak directly for the Forest Service because I'm with the Wildlife Commission, but I do know that you can contact them and there is a fee. I'm not sure if it's based on acreage or miles, but they can come out and put in fire lines prior to burning.
And that is correct. I can speak for the Forest Service. I do work for the Forest Service. And the Forest Service can put in fire lines. And of course, that would be done prior, well in advance of the fire. It's part of the planning process that takes place several months in advance. Okay, let's see, the next one. This person lives on Roanoke Island, and the wooded areas have been left to overgrow under the philosophies of the 40s and 50s. Is there any information that ties this presentation to the management of the North Carolina islands? So it looks like Ms. Bailey is concerned about the management plan of the islands. So there's a lot to this question. So how about this? We may save this one for Laurel. Maybe she can speak for some of the history in that area. But it looks like she does have some questions about the management plan for the islands as a whole and whether or not wildfire would have a catastrophic consequence. Maybe you can speak to that part of it, Jennifer?
So I can't necessarily speak for, I guess, the island because we have very little land there in Dare County. I'm assuming that's where she's saying Roanoke Island, correct?
That's correct.
So we do work with the Forest Service to kind of conduct some of those larger marsh burns to kind of clean off dead vegetation and reduce fuels that way. I know there's the parks are on Roanoke Island, and then there's also like Nag's Head Woods and Kitty Hawk Woods, and they would all have their own management plans for those areas.
Great. Okay, how about another one? Is there a minimum number of acreage required for burning? Miss Bean has a little less than an acre and would like to burn for managing a prairie meadow.
No, there's no limit on things being too small or too big. I would recommend them to do it, especially since they have some goals that they want to achieve, and it could easily be done.
All right, so Scott asked, he was surprised by one of the slides that indicated a lot of the bulk of prescribed burning being done in the Piedmont rather than in the coastal plain. Is this due to the availability of land to conduct the burns or a conscious effort to burn in that region? think that was related to maybe your slide about the number of acres the Wildlife Commission had done.
So those guys are in the Sandhill region, and they're lucky because they can get rain that morning, and because of that sandy soil, they can give it a few hours to dry out, and they can conduct a burn. Whereas us here on the coastal plain, we get some rain, and we're kind of on the sidelines for a little bit. But those guys also have bigger blocks, and they're blocked out with the roads. So fire line establishment isn't, they don't have to establish a lot of fire lines. Like, they use those roads to burn some of those big blocks, and that's how they're able to achieve a lot more than the coastal plain.
Okay. All right, so one more. So what are the steps for a landowner to get a prescribed burn done on their property?
Well, we don't do any. No, you can contact the Forest Service. They will do burning. I think, and you may can answer this, Jennifer, did their price just go up a little bit? Was it to $35 as opposed to $30?
Yes, we are still actually at the $30 per acre.
Okay, so they could contact you guys and have somebody come out and kind of look at it and construct a plan and have them execute the burn. Laurel could answer the question if there's any options or availability for private groups to help out with that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely an option to hire someone. So that could be Forest Service. There are third-party contractors who will do burning, and the Forest Service has a page on their the North Carolina Forest Service has a page on their website that lists those who operate in different parts of the state. Depending on where you live, if you do call your North Carolina Forest Service ranger, they may know of like partnerships or cost share opportunities that could help cut that cost. And then you can always, if you are interested and able, learn to burn yourself. So North Carolina offers the North Carolina Certified Burner certification that folks can get. You go through a course, and then you have to do a checkoff burn that gets you some liability protection. And depending on where you live, there may be groups that can help you get training. For example, in the Sandhills, there's the Sandhills Prescribed Burn Association, which is a group of landowners that get together and burn together, and they have lots of opportunities for training. And yeah, I saw Kelly in the chat. The November webinar is going to cover that piece of like how to actually get the burning done, whether it's paying someone or doing yourself in more depth.
Yes, great questions. Great question, Lauren. And as Laurel said, more will be discussed in November on that. But the very first step really is just reaching out to someone that can actually help you, whether that is a private contractor or the North Carolina Forest Service. And then they can walk you through the steps of the planning that goes into it. And most importantly, looking to determine if you have a forest stand where fire is appropriate for. So Jennifer, it looks like we have answered all of our questions. So if anyone has any other questions that they would like to ask Jennifer, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. If not, then thank you very much, Jennifer, for that. It was a great presentation. I learned a little bit more about the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission and what they're doing in their prescribed burning program, and in a great contrast or comparison of wildfire and prescribed fire. So if there's no more questions, then thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you again, Laurel, for that presentation. And I'm going to share my screen here a little bit. And we will talk about some of our upcoming events. Here. All right, so thank you, ladies, for the presentations. This will, of course, as we said, this is the first meeting of our Prescribed Fire series. So we will have our second and final virtual meeting in November. And that is where we will discuss more in detail of how you actually carry out prescribed fire on your property and the things that you need to consider and look at as you've heard both of these ladies discuss throughout their presentation, there's a lot of planning that is involved in implementing a fire program on your property. And we want to make sure that folks understand that there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of monitoring the weather, creating a plan, and we will go through all of those in November. So we really hope that you will come back and join us then. And it's my slide. All right, so if you are looking to connect more with Forest Her, one thing I failed to mention, and I apologize, this webinar is recorded and it will be posted on the Forest Her NC YouTube channel. So give us about a week to edit this video and get it back up. But if you want to go to YouTube NC, or sorry, you go to YouTube and then in the search block, type Forest Her NC, you will come up with multiple presentations. You will see the previous virtual webinars that we've had over the last year and a half, and give us another week or two and you will see this presentation up there as well. And you are free to view those webinars as many times as you'd like, pause them, repeat them, take pictures of the slide, reach out to the folks or the speakers, or if you have questions, there's several ways that you can connect with Forest Her. If you're looking more specific, then please join our Facebook group, Forest Her NC. If you are social media, a lot of folks prefer social media. This is a great way to reach out with a question. If you had a picture, or if you just wanted to share a local event that might be occurring in your area that is about land management, forest management, or if you just had a question, or maybe looking for a professional that you should reach out to in your area, a great place to start a conversation. And that can be done on our Facebook group. You can also follow Forest Her NC on Instagram, and using these Facebook or the social media outreach is a great way to learn more about programs going on in your local area that you could attend. A lot of these programs may be women-focused events, and others may be more, there may be local field tours or things that you might want to attend. So we try to share that information as we can, as well as sharing more Forest Her North Carolina events that are coming up. You can also join our email listserv. So if you did not receive an email today about this webinar and you would like to, please send us an email to foresternc@gmail.com, and we will add you to our email list. Or if you have questions or would love to become part of Forest Her North Carolina, we are always looking for help. Forest Her NC is simply a group of multiple agencies, consulting firms, natural resource groups, educational, that we are trying to create women-focused events and programming. So we need folks that love to that are into social media and share our message and share local events. We need folks that can help us create these programs for us. We need folks to help us analyze the data that we get from our evaluation forms so that we can continue to bring programs that you are interested in learning more about to you. So please, if you're interested in joining or learning more about Forest Her, please send us an email. Otherwise, that concludes our meeting for today. We still have a little bit more time for questions. So if somebody has a question, please feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A box. We'd love to hear them. If you have got to jump off and leave us today, once again, thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your day. We hope that this information was informative. Laurel and Jennifer did a great job, and I'm sure would love to answer more questions. As you leave here today, you will be taken to an evaluation form. We would really love for you, we ask you to, we really beg you to please fill out and just take a minute to fill out that evaluation form. This helps our workshop planning committee come up with the programs and the information that you want to hear in the future. So we'd love to hear from you. So if you don't mind taking a few minutes. But other than that, thank you for joining us today. If you have questions, please, we're going to stay on here till about 3 o'clock or as long as the questions continue to come. So feel free to type them in. And we thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you back in November.